The first thing I remember is standing in my parents' backyard with one hand pressed against the side of the house, trying to convince myself I was not about to ruin another family moment. I was 34 years old enough to know the difference between panic and something genuinely wrong. But my family had spent so many years calling me dramatic that even then, with my chest tightening and every breath coming too shallow, part of me wondered whether they were right. Inside, music drifted through the open patio doors. Someone laughed. Glasses clinked. My mother, Celeste, had spent 3 weeks planning the party for my younger brother, Gavin, because he had finally announced that he was launching his own business. She called it his fresh start. Gavin had had several fresh starts. Somehow, this one required catered food, rented tables, expensive champagne, and nearly 40 people congratulating him for having potential. I had arrived at 8 that morning to help set everything up. I carried boxes, arranged chairs, picked up flowers, fixed the seating chart, and made 2 emergency trips to the grocery store after Mom realized she had forgotten half the things on her list. By 4 in the afternoon, guests were praising her for how beautiful everything looked. By 5, Gavin was standing beneath a string of patio lights telling a group of friends how hard he had worked to get where he was. Nobody mentioned me, which was normal. I was the person who made things work quietly. Gavin was the person people celebrated afterward. I had learned to live with that difference. At least, I thought I had. The trouble started while I was carrying a tray of empty glasses toward the kitchen. I stopped halfway through the dining room because I suddenly could not seem to pull in a full breath. I set the tray down and waited. Sometimes stress did strange things to the body. I told myself I was tired. I told myself I had skipped lunch. I told myself I just needed water. But a few minutes later, I was standing near the sink with both palms pressed against the counter, breathing in short, uneven pulls that were not getting better. My mother walked in carrying a bottle of wine. She glanced at me once and frowned. "What are you doing?" I turned toward her. "Mom, I don't think I can breathe right." She stared at me for half a second, then looked through the doorway toward the backyard. "Please, Elowen, not today." The words landed harder than they should have because they were so familiar. Not today. Not now. Don't make this difficult. Gavin needs us. Your father is tired. You're stronger than this. I swallowed and tried again. I'm serious? Something feels wrong. Mom lowered her voice. You've been running around all day. Sit down for a minute. You're probably worked up. Gavin appeared behind her, holding a drink and looking irritated before he even knew what was happening. What's going on? Mom answered before I could. Your sister is overwhelmed. I'm not overwhelmed, I said. I'm having trouble breathing. Gavin exhaled through his nose and glanced toward the guests. Can we not do this right now? That was the moment I looked at my father. Arthur was standing near the patio door. He had heard me. I knew he had. For 1 second, I waited for him to step forward and say something. He looked worried, but then he looked at Mom, then at Gavin, then back at me. Maybe get some fresh air, he said quietly. See if that helps? Fresh air. I nodded, because arguing felt harder than breathing. I walked through the side door and stepped onto the front porch, where the evening air was cooler. I sat on the top step and leaned forward, elbows on my knees. I tried breathing slowly, in, out, in, out. It did not help. Behind me, the door closed. I do not think anyone locked it on purpose. That would almost have been easier to understand. They simply closed the door and went back to the party. I could still hear the music through the windows. I could still hear people laughing. Every few seconds, someone's shadow moved across the curtains. Nobody came outside. I sat there for what felt like 10 minutes, though it may have been 3. My breathing became harder, not easier. My hands felt strange. I tried calling Mom, but my phone slipped once before I managed to unlock it. No answer. I called again, still nothing. Then Mrs. Hale from across the street walked toward her mailbox and stopped when she saw me. She was in her 70s and wore slippers outside no matter the weather. "Elowen," she called. "Are you all right?" I wanted to say yes automatically. That was my habit. Instead, I shook my head. I can't catch my breath. Her entire expression changed. She crossed the street faster than I had ever seen her move. "Is someone inside with you?" she asked. I looked back at the glowing windows of my parents' house. "Yes," I said. Then, after a second, "They're still inside." Mrs. Hale did not ask me to calm down. She did not tell me I was tired. She did not remind me that someone else was having an important day. She sat beside me, pulled out her phone, and called for help. That simple act almost made me cry. By the time help arrived, someone from the party finally opened the front door. It was one of Gavin's friends. He looked confused when he saw what was happening. Mom appeared behind him, then Dad, then Gavin. Mom's face changed when she saw strangers attending to me, as though the situation had suddenly become real because someone outside the family had taken it seriously. "Elowen, what happened?" she asked. I looked at her and honestly did not know how to answer. I had told her what was happening, twice. Gavin stood behind her, silent now. Dad looked pale. For a moment, I thought one of them might come with me. Nobody did. Mom said she needed to make sure the guests left safely. Gavin said the whole situation was getting out of hand. Dad squeezed my shoulder and told me to call when I knew more. I was taken away while the party lights were still glowing behind me. At the medical center, I answered questions, underwent tests, and listened while a clinician explained that my breathing trouble needed to be taken seriously and monitored carefully. The immediate danger passed, but I was still shaken, not only because of what had happened physically, but because I could no longer hide from what it meant. I had spent my entire life being the person my family called when something went wrong. Yet, when I had looked them in the eyes and said I needed help, they had decided I was inconvenient. I was sitting alone with my phone in my lap when it began vibrating. "Mom," I stared at her name on the screen. For one foolish second, I thought she was finally calling to ask whether I was all right. I answer, "Mom." There was noise in the background. Her breathing was ragged, almost unrecognizable. "Elowen," she said. Then her voice broke. "It's your father." I sat up straighter. What happened? There was a pause, and then she said the words that changed the direction of everything that came after. "Your dad had a stroke." There are moments when anger disappears because fear is louder, and hearing that my father had suffered a stroke was one of them. Whatever I felt toward my family, whatever had happened on that porch, I still loved my dad. That was the part nobody ever understood about family pain. You could be furious with someone and still feel your entire body go cold when you thought you might lose them. "Where is he?" I asked. Mom gave me the name of the hospital, then immediately started talking faster. She said Dad had collapsed not long after I left. At first they thought he had fainted from stress. Then his speech became strange, and Gavin finally called for help. I closed my eyes. The irony was so sharp I almost could not process it. A few hours earlier, I had told them I could not breathe, and they had decided I was overreacting. Now they had watched Dad show signs of a medical emergency, and suddenly every second mattered. "Elowen, I need you here," Mom said. "Not are you okay, not where are you, not what did the doctors say. I need you here." Even in panic, she had gone directly to the role I had played my whole life. I was the person who came when called, the person who knew where the documents were kept, the person who remembered passwords, policy numbers, birthdays, medication names, tax deadlines, and the phone number of the plumber who had fixed their basement 6 years earlier. I looked down at the hospital band around my own wrist. "I'm still being checked," I said. Silence. Then Mom said, "Can't you leave?" I almost laughed, not because anything was funny, but because for the first time I could hear the pattern clearly while it was happening. "I'll come when I'm cleared to leave," I said. "Until then, Gavin is there." Mom made a frustrated sound. "He doesn't know where anything is." Of course he didn't. Gavin had spent 29 years being protected from the boring parts of adulthood. I had spent 34 years learning to anticipate them. I arrived at the hospital later that evening after I was told I could go home with instructions to follow up and return if my symptoms worsened. I should have gone home. I knew that. Mara would later tell me I should have gone home, but I went to see Dad because I could not sit alone wondering whether the last thing between us would be him telling me to get some fresh air. Mom was pacing near the waiting area when I arrived. Gavin sat in a chair staring at his phone. The moment Mom saw me, relief crossed her face. I thought, for 1 second, that she was relieved because I was safe. Then she handed me Dad's wallet. They need his insurance information. I stared at it. You have his insurance card. I don't know which one is current. Gavin looked up. And they asked about medications. I looked from one of them to the other. You don't know what medications Dad takes. Mom's face tightened. This is not the time, Elowen. There it was again. The sentence that had followed me my entire life. This is not the time. Meaning this is not the time to ask why everyone depends on you. This is not the time to point out that Gavin gets rescued while you get responsibilities. This is not the time to discuss the thing that hurts you, because someone else's discomfort is more important. I took a slow breath. I'll give them what I know. That was the beginning of the next several hours. I spoke with a nurse about Dad's medical history. I found a photo of his medication list that I had taken months earlier after Mom complained that she could never remember which refill was due. I located their insurance portal. I answered questions because I knew the answers, not because anyone had ever officially asked me to take responsibility for them. Gavin wandered in and out of the waiting area. Mom cried, made phone calls, and asked me repeatedly what we were supposed to do next. At one point, I looked at Gavin and realized he was completely lost. This was the son my parents had spent years describing as naturally gifted, ambitious, full of potential. Yet he did not know the name of Dad's primary doctor. He did not know where Mom kept important documents. He did not know whether their health insurance had changed that year. I knew all of it. I always had. When we were kids, the difference had been small enough to ignore. If Gavin forgot homework, Mom drove it to school. If I forgot something, I was told consequences would make me more responsible. When Gavin dropped out of a college program after 1 semester, Dad said he was finding himself. When I changed majors once, Mom spent 3 months asking whether I had lost direction. When Gavin accumulated credit card debt in his early 20s, my parents helped him pay it down. When my car needed a major repair 2 years later, Mom told me I should have planned better. And still, whenever anything truly complicated happened, they called me. Dad had seen it. That was the hardest part. He was kinder than Mom, quieter than Gavin. But silence could become its own kind of participation. Whenever I complained about the double standard, he gave me the same tired smile and said, "Just let it go, Elowen." For years, I thought he meant peace. Now I understood he meant convenience. Mine was the pain everyone could afford to ignore because I would keep functioning anyway. Near midnight, a doctor finally came out and explained that Dad was stable. Though the next several days would matter. Mom covered her mouth. Gavin looked genuinely frightened for the first time all night. I felt something inside me loosen just enough to breathe normally again. Dad was alive. Whatever came next, he was alive. Afterward, Mom asked me to help locate several financial documents she thought they might need. She started listing folders, accounts, paperwork. I was half listening until she said, almost casually, "And I need to find the paperwork for Gavin's loan." I turned toward her. "What loan?" Mom stopped. Gavin, who had been standing near the vending machines, looked over too quickly. "Nothing you need to worry about right now," she said. I felt the first quiet warning move through me. "You just said there was paperwork." "It's business stuff," Gavin said. "It's already being handled." I looked at him. Handled by who? Neither of them answered. Mom picked up her purse and told me we should focus on Dad. Maybe another version of me would have accepted that. The version they knew probably would have. But something had changed between the moment I sat alone on that porch and the moment my mother handed me my father's wallet without asking whether I was okay. For the first time, I started wondering what else my family had been handling without telling me. The next morning, I told myself I was only asking about the loan because Dad was in the hospital and I needed to understand what financial obligations he might be facing. That was partly true. The other truth was that I had seen the look Gavin and Mom exchanged when I asked who was handling the paperwork, and I knew that look. It was the family version of a closed door. By the time I returned to the hospital, Gavin was already there. Mom sat beside Dad, who was awake but exhausted. I kept the visit brief. Whatever questions I had could wait until I was sure he was strong enough to hear them. In the hallway afterward, I asked Mom again, "What loan were you talking about last night?" Her expression hardened immediately. "Elowen, your father just had a stroke." "I know." "Then why are we discussing Gavin's business?" "Because you mentioned paperwork for a loan while we were talking about Dad's finances." Gavin stepped out of the waiting area before she could answer. "Seriously," he said. "You're doing this here?" I looked at him. I asked a question. "Hand Mom told you this isn't the time." There was something almost impressive about the way both of them could turn my asking for information into an act of aggression. "Fine," I said. "Then tell me when the right time is." Mom folded her arms. "Gavin needs additional financing for the business. Your father and I agreed to help." "How much?" "That's between us and Gavin." I nodded. "Then why did you need paperwork?" Gavin shifted his weight. "Because there are different options." "What options?" "Funding options, Elowen. You work in compliance, not finance. You don't have to interrogate everyone." I almost let it go. I really did. Then he added, "We were looking at assets that could strengthen the application." Something in the way he said assets made me stop. "Whose assets?" Mom stepped between us verbally before Gavin could answer. "This is exactly why I didn't want to discuss it now." I ignored her. "Gavin." He looked away for half a second. That was enough. "The house," he said. I felt my stomach tighten. "What house?" He gave me a look that suggested I was being deliberately difficult. "Grandma Maeve's place." For a few seconds, I genuinely could not understand what he meant. Maeve had been my maternal grandmother, and her little house had been the safest place in my childhood. It was not impressive: 2 bedrooms, an old kitchen, a narrow porch, and a garden that had always been slightly too wild. But when I was there, I did not have to earn my place. Grandma Maeve never asked why I could not be more relaxed like Gavin or why I took everything so seriously. She listened. When she died, she left the house to me. Not to Mom, not to the family, to me. I had maintained it ever since. I paid the taxes. I handled the repairs. I had been slowly restoring it because one day I planned to live there full time. "My house?" I asked. Gavin rolled his eyes. "It's not like anyone's trying to take it." "Then why is it part of your loan?" "It could help support the financing." "How?" "There are different structures." "That isn't an answer." Mom finally stepped closer. "Elowen, we only discussed possibilities." "With who?" "People." "What people?" "Financial people." I don't know every technical term. I stared at her. "Did you discuss using my property to support Gavin's business?" "Nobody is using anything," she snapped. "We were exploring options." "Did I agree to those options?" Gavin threw his hands up. "You always do this. You turn everything into some huge accusation." I looked at him. "I'm asking whether you included something I own in a financial plan without talking to me." "We knew you'd help if it came down to it." The hallway seemed to go strangely quiet. Maybe it was because I had spent the previous day being told I was dramatic. Maybe it was because I had just watched my family expect me to manage a crisis they had been completely unprepared for. Whatever the reason, I heard his sentence differently than I would have a week earlier. "We knew you'd help, not we hoped. Not we planned to ask, we knew." "Did anyone ever ask me?" I said. Gavin's expression changed. Mom looked toward Dad's room. Neither answered. That's what I thought. Mom lowered her voice. Your brother is trying to build something for himself. Your grandmother's house is sitting empty most of the time. Nobody said you had to give it away. It's just sitting there? I repeated. That's not what I meant. It sounded exactly like what you meant. Gavin shook his head. You have a good job. You have your own apartment. You don't even live there. And that makes it yours. I didn't say that. Then stop talking about it like it is. Mom told me to calm down. I almost smiled at the predictability of it. For my entire life, the moment I objected to something unreasonable, my reaction became the problem. This was never yours to promise, I said. I left before the conversation could become louder. On the drive home, I kept thinking about Grandma Maeve. I remembered sitting at her kitchen table when I was 14 after Mom had cancelled a weekend trip with me because Gavin had gotten himself into trouble at school. Maeve had poured me lemonade and listened while I tried to pretend I was not hurt. She never told me I was too sensitive. She said disappointment did not become less real just because other people found it inconvenient. Years later, when I learned she had left me the house, Mom called it surprising. Gavin joked that Grandma must have known I was the only one boring enough to maintain it. I laughed with them then. I did not feel like laughing now. When I got home, I opened the folder where I kept the property records. The deed was clear. The house belonged to me. There was no mortgage on it. Nothing had been transferred. Nothing had been signed. Legally, as far as I could tell, I was safe. But that was not the question bothering me. The question was how far they had gone before deciding they needed my actual consent. My work had taught me that assumptions became dangerous when they entered paperwork. I knew better than to accuse anyone without facts, so I called Nolan Price. Nolan had advised Grandma Maeve on financial matters for years and had helped settle several practical issues after her death. We had not spoken in months. He answered on the fourth ring. After some small talk, I asked him directly, "Has anyone contacted you recently about Grandma's house?" There was a pause. "What do you mean?" "Its value, ownership. Whether it could be used in some kind of financing arrangement, anything like that." The silence lasted longer this time. I stood beside my kitchen counter, suddenly aware of my heartbeat. "Nolan? Elowen," he said carefully. "Why are you asking me this?" I told him about Gavin's business and the loan. I told him what had been said at the hospital. I did not tell him what I suspected because I did not want my suspicions shaping his answer. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. "I haven't changed anything related to the property," he said. "And as far as I know, no one has authority to do that without you." Relief came first, then I noticed what he had not said. That wasn't my question. Another pause. "No," he admitted. "It wasn't." I gripped the edge of the counter. "Did someone ask about the house?" "There have been inquiries." The word sent a cold feeling through me. "From who?" "I don't want to give you an incomplete answer over the phone." "Nolan?" His voice softened. "Nothing has been transferred, Elowen. Your ownership is not suddenly gone. I want you to understand that first." "Oh, but," I asked. He was quiet for another second. Then he said, "I think you need to come see me." And that was when I realized Gavin and my mother had done more than simply talk about a possibility over dinner. Someone had already started asking questions about a future they apparently expected me to finance. I met Nolan the following afternoon, and before I even sat down, I knew the conversation was going to be worse than I had hoped. He had a thin folder on the desk in front of him, not a dramatic stack of evidence, just a few printed emails, notes from phone calls, and copies of basic property information. Somehow, that made it feel more real. People imagine betrayal as something loud. In my experience, it usually begins with ordinary paperwork. Nolan started by repeating what he had told me on the phone. The house was mine. No lien had been placed on it. No ownership had changed. Nobody had signed my name. There was no completed transaction I needed to undo. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. Then what happened? I asked. He turned the folder toward me. Several weeks earlier, someone working with Gavin had started asking general questions about the property. What was its approximate value? Was it owned outright? Was there existing debt attached to it? Would the owner potentially consider using it in connection with financing? The questions had been framed as preliminary, nothing binding. But they were specific enough that Nolan had become uncomfortable. "Who told them they could ask?" I said. "The initial contact referenced your family," he replied. "Later conversations involved your mother." I stared at him. "My mother spoke to them?" Nolan nodded. "She never claimed to own the property. I want to be precise about that, but she gave the impression that family approval would not be an obstacle." "Family approval?" I almost laughed. "There is no family approval." "There's my approval." "Exactly." Nolan tapped one of the pages. "That's why nothing moved forward." I read through the notes slowly. Mom had apparently described the house as an asset that might become available to support Gavin's financing. In another exchange, someone had written that the owner was expected to cooperate. Expected. That word hurt more than I thought it would. "They planned around my yes before I ever gave one," I said. Nolan did not answer immediately. Then he nodded. "That appears to be the problem." I sat back and stared at the ceiling. Suddenly, the argument at the hospital looked different. Gavin had not casually mentioned Grandma Maeve's house, because they had only discussed some vague possibility. He had spoken about it like a piece already positioned on a board. All that remained was moving me into place. "Did my father know?" I asked. Nolan looked uncertain. "I can't tell you what Arthur personally understood. But you have something." He hesitated, then showed me another note. It referred to a conversation about whether both parents supported Gavin's plans. According to the summary, Arthur believed I had agreed in principle to helping if necessary. I read the sentence twice. "I never said that." "I know. I never even knew about the loan." Nolan leaned forward. "Then you need to document that clearly now." That was the moment my professional instincts finally overtook my emotional ones. At work, I spent my days reviewing processes and identifying gaps between what people said had happened and what records actually showed. I had learned that memory could be challenged, verbal promises could be reinterpreted, assumptions could become stories, and stories repeated often enough could start sounding like facts. I went home and opened everything: emails, text messages, old family group chats, property documents, records of money I had transferred to my parents over the years when they needed help with unexpected expenses. I was not looking for ammunition. At least, that was not how I thought of it. I was trying to understand the pattern. What I found disturbed me because nothing looked terrible by itself. 3 years earlier, Mom had asked whether I could, temporarily, cover an insurance payment because Gavin needed help moving. The following year, Dad asked if I could organize their tax documents because Mom was busy helping Gavin through a breakup. There were repair bills I had handled, appointments I had scheduled, problems I had solved. Every request had sounded small. Every yes had made the next yes easier to assume, and somewhere along the way, my family had stopped distinguishing between what I chose to give and what they believed they were entitled to receive. That evening, Mara came over with takeout. She had known my family long enough that I did not need to explain the history. I showed her the notes Nolan had given me. She read them silently, then put them down. "You know what they're doing, right? Assuming I'll give in? More than that." She pointed toward the papers. "They don't ask you at the beginning because you might say no. They decide first. Then they build everything around your cooperation. By the time they finally come to you, saying no feels like you're destroying something that already exists." I stared at her. She had described my entire family life in 4 sentences. I thought about birthday plans I had changed because Gavin needed something. Money I had lent because Mom had already promised someone I would help. Holidays I had rearranged because Dad said everyone was counting on me. None of those decisions had begun with a direct question. They began with an assumption, followed by pressure. They wait until saying no feels cruel, I said. Mara nodded. Exactly. My phone buzzed on the table. Gavin. I almost ignored it, but something made me open the message. He had sent me a photograph of several pages. Underneath it was a short text. Just sign it so we can keep things moving. I enlarged the image. The documents were not a transfer of ownership, but they were clearly connected to the financing structure he had been discussing. My cooperation would have moved his plan one significant step closer. I felt anger rise, but beneath it was something calmer, something new. A week earlier, I might have called him immediately. I would have argued. He would have accused me of misunderstanding. Mom would have joined the call. Dad would have asked everyone to calm down. Eventually, I would have been so exhausted that I might have agreed to something smaller just to end the conflict. This time, I did nothing. Aren't you going to answer? Mara asked. Not yet. I took screenshots of the message. I saved the documents. I wrote down the date and time. Then I put my phone face down. For once, Gavin could wait. The next morning, I received another message, then another. By noon, Mom had called twice. I did not ignore them forever. I simply refused to react on their schedule. Before answering anyone, I wrote one sentence in a blank document on my computer. I have not agreed, verbally or in writing, to pledge, guarantee, encumber, or otherwise use my property in support of Gavin's business or financing. I read it several times. It was strange how powerful a factual sentence could feel when you had spent your life defending yourself emotionally. Then I opened Gavin's messages again. He had written, "Mom said you'd help." That sentence did not surprise me anymore. I typed a response, deleted it, and tried again. In the end, I sent only one line. Send me the complete request and all related documents in writing. His reply came almost instantly. Why? I looked at the screen and felt something settle inside me. For the first time, Gavin was realizing that my automatic yes was no longer automatic, and for the first time, I was beginning to understand just how much of his future depended on everyone believing it still was. The first real no I ever gave my family did not sound like a no at first. It sounded like a request for paperwork. Gavin sent the documents later that afternoon, though not without complaining that I was making a simple situation unnecessarily complicated. I read every page twice. Then I sent the relevant sections to Nolan and made sure I understood exactly what was being requested of me. By the time I finished, one thing was clear. Gavin needed my cooperation far more than he had admitted. The house Grandma Maeve left me was not the only possible source of support for his financing, but its value would make his application significantly stronger. Without it, he would either need to bring in more of his own money, find another qualified source of support, or reduce the scale of what he was trying to launch. In other words, his plan was not impossible without me. It was simply less impressive. That distinction mattered. My phone rang just after 6. Gavin did not bother with hello. Did you read everything? I did. Good. So when can you sign? I looked out my apartment window and felt strangely calm. I'm not signing it. Silence. What? I'm not using Grandma's house to support your business. He laughed once, but there was no humor in it. You're serious? Yes. You made me send you all that just to say no. I asked for the documents because I wanted to know what you were asking me to do. It's not like you're giving me the house. I understand that. Then what's the problem? There were 100 answers I could have given. I could have talked about the risk. I could have talked about Maeve. I could have talked about the fact that he had spent weeks planning around my property without speaking to me. Instead, I chose the simplest truth. I never agreed to this. Gavin's voice sharpened. Mom said you would help. Mom cannot agree on my behalf. We're family, Elowen. I closed my eyes. There it was. The word that had been used to collect more from me than any contract ever could. Then you should have treated me like family and asked. He hung up. Mom called 7 minutes later. I almost admired the efficiency. "What did you say to your brother?" she demanded. "I told him I'm not signing." "Why would you do that now?" "Because he asked me now. Your father is in the hospital. Gavin is trying to keep his business from falling apart before it even starts, and you choose this moment to become difficult." I felt the old reflex immediately. Explain yourself, make her understand, prove you are not selfish. But another thought followed it. She had not needed to understand my reasons before planning around my property. Why was I required to present a defense now? "I'm not risking my future for a decision I never made," I said. "Nobody is asking you to risk your future." "Then my answer shouldn't be a problem." She went quiet. "You've changed since the party." I looked down at my hands. "Yes," I said. That answer seemed to unsettle her more than an argument would have. For the first time, I did not rush to reassure her that I was still the same dependable daughter. I was not. Something had changed on that porch. Not because I had suddenly stopped loving my family, but because I had finally understood the cost of being useful to people who treated my needs as optional. Over the next few days, I started making small changes. I sent Mom the contact information for Dad's insurance instead of calling on her behalf. I showed her where to find the online account instead of managing it myself. When Gavin asked me to check a business document because I was good with this stuff, I told him to speak to the professional handling his financing. When Mom called about a household bill, I explained where the information was and let her handle it. None of these things were cruel. None were dramatic, yet my family reacted as if I had disappeared. "I don't understand why you can't just do it," Mom said, when I refused to spend an afternoon sorting through a problem with one of their accounts. "Because you can do it. You know how. So can you, Elowen. I have enough to deal with." I almost said, "So do I." Instead, I said, "I'll help with what Dad genuinely needs while he recovers. I won't manage everyone." The distinction seemed impossible for her to accept. To Mom, helping had always meant taking ownership of the problem until it stopped being someone else's problem. My new boundaries exposed how much invisible work I had been doing. Small things began slipping. A bill Mom thought I had scheduled did not get paid until she handled it herself. Gavin missed a deadline because he assumed I would remind him. A form sat unanswered because everyone believed I knew where it belonged. Each time, someone called me. Each time, I asked the same question. Is this actually mine to handle? Usually, the answer was no. Gavin became increasingly angry as the financing for his business stalled. Without my property involved, he needed to revise his plan. He had already talked publicly about the business, as if everything were finalized. He had told friends he was weeks away from launching. He had accepted congratulations at a party my family had spent thousands celebrating. Now reality was catching up with the announcement. One evening, he showed up at my apartment without calling. "Do you understand what you're doing?" he asked as soon as I opened the door. "You'll have to be more specific." "The financing. They want more security or more cash. You knew this would happen." "I knew my house wasn't available." "You're ruining this over some principle." I stared at him. "Your plan requires something I own. Me refusing to provide it is not the same as me ruining your plan. I have people depending on me. Then build something you can actually support." His face tightened. "You think you're better than me." That surprised me because I had spent most of my life being told the opposite. "No," I said. "I think what belongs to me belongs to me." He stepped back. "Fine. I have another way." "Good." He clearly expected me to ask what it was. I did not. After he left, I felt guilty for almost an hour. Then I realized guilt did not automatically mean I had done something wrong. Sometimes it only meant I had stopped doing what people expected. 2 days later, Nolan called. His tone was careful. "I found something you should know about." My stomach tightened. "Is it the house?" "No. Your house is fine." "Then what?" He hesitated. "I was reviewing some of the information connected to Gavin's financing because you asked me to help make sure nothing involved your property. There appears to have been another source of funds. What kind of funds? A substantial transfer. I sat down. From where? An account associated with your parents. For a moment, I said nothing. Mom had told me she and Dad were helping Gavin, so the existence of some money was not shocking. But Nolan would not have called me over an ordinary family gift. Oh, substantial? I asked. He gave me a figure. I stopped breathing for an entirely different reason. It was far more than I had imagined my parents would risk. Does Dad know? I asked. Nolan was quiet. I can't answer that with certainty. But, based on what I'm seeing, I'm not convinced your father understood how much had already been moved. I thought about Dad lying in a hospital bed. I thought about Mom telling me this was not the time to ask questions. I thought about Gavin standing in my apartment saying he had another way. Suddenly, I understood what he might have meant. When I refused to let him build his future on my property, he had not abandoned the plan. He had simply turned back toward the two people who had spent his entire life protecting him from the word no. And this time, I was beginning to suspect my father did not even know the full price they had agreed to pay. The problem with being the person who always fixes things is that people eventually forget you are also the person who notices when things do not add up. I did not confront Mom immediately after Nolan's call. A year earlier, I probably would have. I would have called her while I was still angry. She would have denied or minimized everything. Gavin would have inserted himself into the conversation. And by the end I would somehow be defending why I had asked the question in the first place. I was done having arguments where facts became feelings the moment the facts were inconvenient. So I waited until I understood what I actually knew. Nolan could confirm that a significant amount of money had moved from an account connected to my parents into arrangements related to Gavin's business. What he could not tell me was exactly what Dad had approved or what Mom had told him. That distinction mattered. I was not going to accuse my mother of taking money without permission when I had no proof of that. But I did know something else. Dad had spoken to me about their finances only a few months earlier. He had complained that retirement was going to be tighter than he had expected. He had mentioned wanting to keep a larger emergency cushion because the house needed work. The amount Nolan described did not fit the picture Dad had given me. I called Mom the next morning. How much money did you and Dad give Gavin? There was a pause. Why are you asking? Because I know there was a substantial transfer. Her voice changed. Have you been going through our accounts? No. Then this is none of your business. It became my business when you tried to include my house in the same financing plan. We did not try to take your house. I didn't say. You did. I kept my voice even. I'm asking whether Dad knows how much money went to Gavin. She was silent just long enough to answer the question without answering it. Your father wanted to help his son. How much did he think he was helping? I am not having this conversation with you. Then have it with Dad. Absolutely not. Her answer came so quickly that I sat back. Why not? Because he is recovering from a stroke, Elowen. He does not need you upsetting him over financial details. There it was again. The same mechanism. Someone else made the decision. I was asked to protect the consequences. I'm not going to upset him, I said. But I'm also not going to lie if he asks me. Nobody is asking you to lie. You're asking me not to tell him. I'm asking you to use judgment. I almost smiled. In my family, using judgment usually meant choosing whatever kept Gavin comfortable. I ended the call without agreeing to anything. Later that afternoon, Mom sent me 3 messages about Dad's follow-up care, followed by a 4th asking if I could help Gavin review his revised business numbers. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Even after everything, she still believed I would step in. I replied that Gavin needed to work with his own financial advisor. Her answer was immediate. You're really going to leave him struggling when you could help? I did not respond. Gavin called that evening. "Did you talk to Mom about the money?" he asked.
Yes.
"Why are you digging into this?" "Because Dad may not know how much you received. He knows they're investing in me." "That wasn't what I said," Gavin sighed. "You always do this technical wording thing." "Numbers are not technical wording. Mom and Dad wanted to help me. Then there shouldn't be a problem with Dad knowing the exact amount." Silence. "You're trying to turn him against me," Gavin said. "No, I'm trying to make sure he knows what happened with his money." "Or parents' money." "Exactly, both of them." His voice rose. "If you had just agreed to help in the first place, none of this would be an issue." For a moment, I was stunned by how sincerely he believed that. In Gavin's mind, the problem was not that his plan depended on resources he did not control. The problem was that one of those resources had refused to cooperate. "Me. Listen to what you just said," I told him. "You built this around something that was never yours, and now you're blaming me because you can't use it." "I built a business plan around family support." "No. You built it around assumptions." "Same difference." "Not anymore." I ended the call. Over the next week, Gavin's situation began unraveling in small, predictable ways. Nothing catastrophic happened. There was no dramatic collapse. Reality simply refused to rearrange itself around him. Without my property supporting the financing, the available terms changed. Without additional money from my parents, he could not launch at the scale he had advertised. He had already committed to expenses based on the expectation that everything would work out. Now he had to delay some plans, renegotiate others, and admit to people that his grand opening timeline was uncertain. Mom treated each setback as evidence that I was punishing him. I saw it differently. I had not taken anything away from Gavin. I had simply stopped providing something he had counted before he owned it. Meanwhile, Dad slowly improved. His recovery would take time, but he was alert enough to hold longer conversations. I visited him without Mom when I could. We talked about ordinary things at first. My work, the weather, the garden he had neglected. Neither of us mentioned the porch. Neither of us mentioned Gavin. Then one afternoon, Dad asked me to bring him a notebook from home. "I want to start going through some bills," he said. "Your mother says I shouldn't worry about it, but I need to know where things stand." I felt the tension in my shoulders immediately. "You should probably talk to Mom first." He studied my face. "Why?" "Because she's been handling some things while you've been sick." "What things?" I hesitated. I had promised myself I would not volunteer information simply to hurt anyone, but I had also promised I would not lie. "You need to ask her." Dad frowned. "Elowen, what aren't you telling me?" Before I could answer, Mom entered the room. She must have heard the last sentence because her expression changed immediately. "Nothing," she said. "Your father needs rest." Dad looked at her. "I'm asking about our finances." "And I told you everything is under control. How much did we give Gavin?" The room became still. Mom glanced at me. That one glance told Dad more than she intended. "What does Elowen have to do with this?" he asked. "Nothing," Mom said quickly. "Exactly," I said. She turned toward me. "Not now." Dad looked between us. "I want someone to tell me what's going on." Mom started explaining that Gavin's business had needed additional support. She said they had discussed helping him. Dad agreed. He remembered that. Then she mentioned that the original plan had involved several sources of financing. Dad nodded slowly. "Including Maeve's house, right?" I stared at him. "What did you hear about Maeve's house?" He looked confused by my reaction. "Your mother said you were willing to help if Gavin needed additional backing," Mom interrupted. "Arthur, you're tired." He ignored her. His eyes stayed on me. "I thought you agreed." My chest tightened. But this time I knew exactly why. "Dad, I didn't even know about the loan until after your stroke." The color seemed to drain from his face. Mom stepped forward. "This is a misunderstanding." "No," Dad said quietly. Then he looked directly at me. Did you ever agree to any of this? Mom said my name sharply, as if she could still warn me back into my old role. I looked at my father, then at the woman who had spent years answering questions for me before I could answer them myself. This time, I did not let her. And I knew that whatever happened after I spoke, the version of our family that had existed before that moment was about to end. No, I said, never agreed to any of it. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Dad looked at me as if he were waiting for the rest of the sentence, some qualification that would make everything less serious. There wasn't one. I never agreed to use Grandma Maeve's house, I continued. I never agreed to guarantee Gavin's financing. I didn't even know my property was being discussed until Gavin mentioned it at the hospital. Dad slowly turned toward Mom. You told me she was willing. Mom's face tightened. I said we believed she would be willing. There's a difference. Not the way you said it to me. Arthur, this is exactly why I didn't want to discuss this while you're recovering. Stop saying that. His voice was not loud, but I had almost never heard my father speak to my mother that way. Mom went still. Dad looked back at me. Start from the beginning. I did. I kept it simple. I told him about the loan Mom had accidentally mentioned. I explained what Gavin had said about Maeve's house. I told him about my conversation with Nolan and the inquiries that had been made about the property. I explained that nothing had been transferred and nobody had taken legal control of anything belonging to me. I wanted that point clear. I was not accusing my family of stealing my house. The truth was bad enough without exaggeration. But they were planning around it, I said. People were told I was expected to cooperate. You were told I had agreed in principle. Neither of those things came from me. Mom shook her head. You're making this sound much more calculated than it was. Then explain it, Dad said. We were trying to help Gavin. With Elowen's property? Potentially, if she agreed. I looked at her. But you told Dad I already had. I told him you would probably help, because you always help. There it was. The entire problem compressed into 5 words, because you always help. Gavin arrived later that afternoon, after Mom called him. I did not know what she told him, but he walked into Dad's room already angry. Why are we doing this now? He asked. Dad needs to recover. Dad looked at him. How much money did we give you? Gavin glanced at Mom. You know about the investment. I know what I thought we agreed to. I'm asking how much you received. Gavin gave him the number. Dad closed his eyes. The amount was significantly higher than what he had understood. Mom immediately started explaining. Some of it had been discussed. Some had been moved later because Gavin needed to meet certain requirements. Some, she said, was still recoverable. Gavin insisted the business would make the money back once it launched. Dad listened without interrupting. I watched his face change as he realized how many decisions had been made while everyone assumed the final gaps would somehow be filled, probably by me. On the house, Dad asked Gavin. Whose idea was that? Gavin looked at me. It wasn't like that. Then tell me what it was like. We needed additional backing. Mom said Elowen would probably help. Did Elowen say that? Dad asked. Gavin did not answer. Mom stepped in. We are going in circles. No, I said. We're finally standing still long enough to see the circle. Gavin rolled his eyes. Or we go. I looked at him. You want to know why I'm angry? It's not because you asked for help. You didn't ask. You planned my sacrifice before asking for my consent. That's ridiculous. Is it? You announced your business. You held a celebration. You built a financing plan. People started asking questions about my property, and only after all of that did you send me something to sign. Because we're family? Gavin said. I almost laughed. Where was family when I needed you? The room went silent again. Gavin looked away. Mom's face hardened. Do not use what happened at the party to punish everyone forever. I'm not punishing anyone. You keep bringing it up. I've barely brought it up at all. Because you want us to feel guilty. I stared at her. Mum, I told you I couldn't breathe. And I thought you were overwhelmed. I told you twice. How was I supposed to know it was serious? You could have believed me. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I turned toward Dad. And you heard me. His eyes dropped. That hurt more than anything Mom could have said. You told me to get some air. I continued. Then all of you went back inside. A woman across the street who barely knows me took me more seriously than my own family. Gavin shifted uncomfortably. We didn't know. That's the point. None of you tried to know. Mom crossed her arms. So this is revenge. No? My answer came immediately. Revenge would be me trying to take something from Gavin because I'm angry. I'm not doing that. I'm keeping what belongs to me. I'm refusing to sign documents I never agreed to sign. I'm refusing to keep solving problems I didn't create. And you're letting your brother's business fail. If his business can only survive because I surrender my property, then I'm not the reason it fails. Gavin stared at me with open resentment. Dad was quiet for a long time. Then he said something I never expected. She's right. Mom turned toward him. Arthur. She's right, Celeste. You're taking her side now. Dad gave a tired, bitter laugh. That sentence is part of the problem. Mom looked stunned. Dad turned to me. I knew. I frowned. Knew what? Not about the house. Not about all of this. He gestured weakly toward the papers. I mean, I knew we treated you differently. I did not move. He swallowed. Gavin always needed more. At least that's what I told myself. You were responsible. You figured things out. Every time your mother gave him another chance, I thought you'd be fine because you were stronger. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I refused to look away. Dad continued. Whenever you complained, I told you to let it go because that was easier. Easier than arguing with your mother. Easier than making Gavin grow up. Easier than admitting you had a reason to be angry. His voice broke slightly. I called you strong because it was easier than admitting we failed you. For years, I had imagined what it would feel like to hear one of my parents finally acknowledge the truth. I thought it would feel like victory. It did not. It felt like grief. Because acknowledgement did not give me back all the years I had spent wondering whether I was selfish for wanting the same care everyone gave Gavin automatically. I needed you to say that a long time ago? I whispered. I know. Mom sat down, suddenly looking older. Gavin said nothing. For once nobody rushed to make him feel better. I explained my boundaries clearly. I would visit Dad. I would help with specific things related to his recovery when I chose to, and when they genuinely needed my involvement. But I would not manage my parents' household. I would not finance Gavin's business. I would not guarantee his loans. I would not use Maeve's house as security. I would not be the family emergency fund, administrator, mediator, or backup plan anymore. Mom shook her head. So what are we supposed to do? The old me would have answered that question. The old me would already have been building a list. Instead, I said, you'll figure it out. Gavin left first. Mom followed soon afterward. I stayed with Dad. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he looked at me and asked, when I get out of here, can we go back to normal? I thought about the question carefully. I thought about the porch, the closed door, Mrs. Hale crossing the street, Mom handing me Dad's wallet before asking whether I was okay, Gavin counting my house as part of a future I had never agreed to fund. I loved my father. Maybe one day I would forgive him completely. But normal was the system that had created all of this. Normal was exactly what I could never accept again. No, I said. Dad's face fell slightly. I reached over and took his hand. But maybe that's not a bad thing. And for the first time in my life, I left a family conversation without fixing what my honesty had broken. The strange thing about putting down responsibilities that were never truly yours is that your hands still feel full for a while. In the weeks after Dad left the hospital, I kept waking up with the feeling that I had forgotten something. A bill, an appointment, a phone call Mom needed me to make, a deadline Gavin expected me to remember. Then I would check my phone and realize there was nothing. Or, more accurately, there was nothing that belonged to me. Dad's recovery was slow, but he made progress. He had appointments, therapy, and a long list of instructions that would have overwhelmed our family a few months earlier because everyone would have immediately turned toward me. This time I helped Dad understand the basics. Then I stepped back. Mom learned to manage his schedule. She complained about it at first. She called me twice during the first week to ask questions she could answer herself if she looked at the paperwork. The first time, I almost took over automatically. Instead, I told her exactly where the information was. "Can't you just check it for me?" she asked. "You have the same document I do. Would take you 2 minutes. Then it should take you 2 minutes too." She hung up irritated. 10 minutes later, she figured it out. That small moment should not have felt important, but it did. Nothing collapsed because I refused to rescue her. The world kept moving. Mom solved the problem. Dad made it to his appointment. I went back to my own life. Gavin's business did not disappear either. That was another thing Mom had been wrong about. For weeks, she acted as though my refusal would destroy his future. It did not. It destroyed one version of his future, the version built around money and property he did not actually control. He had to delay the launch. He gave up the larger location he had wanted and scaled down his initial plans. Some of the people he had bragged to stopped asking questions when the grand opening date came and went. I knew that embarrassed him. I also knew embarrassment was survivable. One afternoon, he called me unexpectedly. We had barely spoken since the confrontation in Dad's hospital room. "I found a smaller place," he said. "For the business." "Yeah. That's good." There was a pause. I could tell he had expected more. Maybe congratulations. Maybe an offer to help. "It's not what I originally wanted," he said. "Then start with what you actually have." He went quiet. "You really don't feel bad, do you?" I thought about that before answering. "I feel bad that things got this far. I don't feel bad that my house is still mine." He did not apologize. I did not expect him to. Gavin had spent almost 30 years learning that discomfort meant someone else should fix the situation. It would take more than a few difficult weeks to undo that. But for the first time, he was being forced to build something without treating me as part of his available resources. That was enough for me. The biggest change happened at Grandma Maeve's house. I had always told myself I would move there eventually. Eventually had become one of those words that meant never unless you gave it a date. So I gave it one. I ended the lease on my apartment and began moving into the house gradually. Mara helped me paint the spare bedroom. We cleared old boxes from the hallway and spent an entire Saturday arguing over whether one of Maeve's ancient lamps was charming or hideous. "It's hideous," Mara said. It was Grandma's. "Then it is a historically significant hideous lamp." I laughed harder than the joke deserved. Maybe because laughter felt different there. It did not interrupt anyone. It did not require me to check whether Gavin needed something or whether Mom was annoyed. The house was quiet. At first, the quiet made me uncomfortable. I would sit at the kitchen table and feel as though I should be doing something for someone. Then I started understanding that peace can feel suspicious when you have spent your life preparing for the next demand. One evening, I told Mara I sometimes wondered whether I had abandoned my family. She put down her coffee and looked at me. "You're not abandoning them. You're finally standing beside yourself." I wanted to argue. Instead, I let the sentence stay where it landed. My relationship with Mom remained complicated. She never gave me the apology I secretly wanted, not a complete one. She apologized for how things happened at the party, which was not the same as apologizing for not believing me. She admitted she should have spoken to me before discussing the house, though she continued insisting she had only been trying to help Gavin. I stopped trying to force her to understand the entire pattern. That was another responsibility I could put down. Mom's understanding was not required for my boundary to exist. Dad was different. Recovery changed him, though not in some miraculous overnight way. He became quieter, more willing to sit with uncomfortable conversations instead of escaping them. He began handling his own finances again as soon as he was able, and one of his first decisions was to make sure nothing else would be committed to Gavin without his direct agreement. He did not demand the money back immediately. He and Mom had choices to make together. I stayed out of them. That was their marriage, their money, their responsibility. One afternoon, Dad asked if he could visit Maeve's house. We sat on the porch with coffee. For a while, he stared at the garden. "Your grandmother always liked you being here," he said. "I liked being here." "I know." Another silence. Then he asked, "How long were you carrying all of us?" I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "The bills, the paperwork, your brother, your mother, me." He rubbed his hands together slowly. "How long did we make you feel responsible for everything?" I could have given him a timeline. I could have named incidents going back 20 years. Instead, I said, "Long enough." Dad nodded. "I'm sorry." This time, he did not add an excuse. He did not tell me Gavin needed more help. He did not say Mom meant well. He did not ask me to let anything go, just "I'm sorry." I realized then that forgiveness and restoration were different things. I could forgive my father and still refuse to return to the role he had allowed me to occupy. I could love Mom and still let her be angry when I said no. I could hope Gavin succeeded without financing his success. Helping them was my choice now. It was not my job. Months after the party, I drove past my parents' house and saw the front porch where Mrs. Hale had found me. For a moment, I remembered exactly how it felt to sit there listening to my family continue celebrating inside. Back then, I thought the worst part was that nobody opened the door, but I understand it differently now. I had spent years waiting outside emotionally, hoping that if I was useful enough, patient enough, responsible enough, someone would finally invite me into the version of the family where my needs mattered too. The stroke changed my father's life, but the hours surrounding it changed mine. My family needed me again almost immediately. The difference was that I finally understood being needed was not the same as being valued. I did not stop loving them. I stopped using my love as permission for them to take whatever they needed from me. Grandma Maeve's house remained mine. Gavin started smaller. Mom learned that my no did not become a yes simply because she was disappointed. Dad and I began building a relationship based on honesty instead of silence. And I began building something too, a life where I could help people without disappearing inside their problems. A life where I did not have to prove my strength by enduring whatever my family placed on my shoulders. They had spent years calling me strong whenever they needed something from me. The moment I finally used that strength to protect myself, some of them called me selfish. That was when I knew I had made the right choice. I had spent years waiting for them to let me back in. I finally realized I was free to walk somewhere else. 6 months later, I woke up one Saturday morning in Grandma Maeve's house and realized my phone had not rung once during the night. There were no emergency messages from Mom, no last-minute problems from Gavin, no list of things Dad needed me to handle before breakfast. For years, silence had made me nervous because it usually meant I had forgotten something. Now it meant something completely different. It meant peace. Dad was doing better. His recovery had changed the way he lived, but it had also changed the way he treated me. He stopped asking me to smooth things over whenever Mom was upset. He stopped making excuses for Gavin. Most importantly, when he needed help, he asked instead of assuming. Sometimes I said yes, sometimes I said no, and somehow, our relationship survived both answers. Mom and I were still a work in progress. I had finally accepted that she might never understand everything the way I wanted her to. But she understood one thing clearly now: my boundaries were not temporary. Gavin eventually opened his business on a much smaller scale than he had originally planned. He never thanked me for refusing to rescue him, and I never expected him to. But from what I heard, he was learning how to solve his own problems. Maybe that was the best thing any of us could have given him. As for me, I kept the house. I restored Maeve's garden. I replaced the old kitchen cabinets, but kept her ridiculous lamp because Mara insisted it had become part of the family history. My life became quieter, but it also became mine. Looking back, I used to think karma meant watching the people who hurt you lose everything. I don't believe that anymore. Sometimes karma is much simpler. It is watching people finally carry the weight they kept placing on your shoulders. It is letting them face the consequences of their own choices, while you walk away without hatred. My family did not lose everything, and I did not want them to. They simply lost access to the version of me who believed love meant endless sacrifice. The woman sitting alone on that porch thought she had been abandoned. She had no idea she was standing at the beginning of her freedom. And if your own family treated your needs like an inconvenience, but expected you to rescue them whenever they needed something, would you have given them another chance? Or would you have finally walked away too?